Welcome back, everyone. Well, this political season has proven a lot of things. I'm not going to talk about a national level. We'll leave that for some other time. But here in our region, Saratoga, Warren, and Washington County, we've got to meet a lot of very interesting candidates. First, party affiliations, second, third, or fourth, or whatever. And joining me today is the incumbent for the 113th Assembly seat, which is a district that encompasses Saratoga, Washington County, some others. Carrie Woerner. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
It's great to have you here. Carrie and I probably met first about 2 years ago, I think.
I think so,
in various
yeah.
functions and whatever. And, I noticed that you had just a wonderful way when people approach you and they were talking to you about the issues and whatever. You're very engaging with them, and I think that's a sign of somebody who really feels very strongly about public service.
Thank you, Jesse.
So,
I do.
Yeah, I know you do. With that in mind, usually it takes a certain amount of passion with that too. Why are you interested in this?
I'm a real believer in democracy and in public service. I had a sixth grade teacher, Mrs. Starzl, and she did a whole section on what does it mean to be a citizen. And she had us go to city council meetings, to help out at a nonprofit, and to work on a campaign. And what I took away from that at 12 years old was that we have a responsibility as a citizen to participate in the civic life of our community in one way or another. And at 54 years old, or then 52, I found myself at a position in my life where I could participate in the civic life at a higher level, and so that was it was just the right time in my life to run for office, and so that's what I did.
So when you looked at the district, I think you were telling me before we went on air that the person was running unopposed.
That's right. In
that got to you.
It did. In 2010, I noticed that then Assemblymember Tony Jordan was running unopposed, and I just thought democracy is about choice at the ballot box. It's about assessing candidates and which one do you think is going to do the best job, who's going to be the most effective, and making your choice. And when we don't have a choice, it really isn't true democracy. So that was really what prompted me to explore running for office at the time, and I'm very glad I did.
Well, you know what? Be careful what you wish for, right? Because when you get in the trenches, sometimes there are things that you discover. Interesting. Assembly seat is every 2 years.
Yes.
So you're almost never not running, if you know what I mean. But give me an experience from this first term. What'd you learn?
The list of lessons learned is pretty long. I would have to say that the thing that I learned the most is that you have to be in touch with the constituents that you represent to understand what are the opportunities and the challenges, and then when faced with a public policy question, filter the options through the lens of what's best for your district, and then really participate in an active way through the legislative process to shape the outcomes. And the example I would give has to do with education funding. Yeah. And I really, as I was running, I ran in 2012 and lost, and then ran again in 2014. I really became very knowledgeable about what was happening in our schools from a funding perspective, and what that meant in terms of the quality of education that any school, the offerings that a school could have. And so my first bill was to repeal the gap elimination adjustment problem.
Oh, that happened
and to restore
back
those
during the Patterson era.
It did.
When we hit the recession and they were running into serious budget problems.
Exactly. Right. And so I wanted to get those monies back. It was about $1.5 billion that was still owed to schools, and they were primarily rural upstate schools that were impacted. So I made it my mission to get those monies restored, because I think none of us want to see that the quality of education be a function of the zip code you live in. So what I learned with that, though, is I've got a lot of colleagues in the state legislature that come from other parts of the state who have different needs. And so I really had to learn how to build relationships and build communities of interest within the legislature to push this agenda, to make sure that everybody understood that this was funding rural upstate schools was critically important to the vast part of the state, and that was something that everybody had to get behind. And it took 2 years, but we got all that money restored.
You did. Again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the way that was evaluated actually favored urban schools a lot more than it did rural schools. Something about property assessments, but not actual cash in there. And these schools in our more rural areas really had a more dire need for funding, right?
Yeah, so you're referring to the school aid formula generally,
Okay.
and how once the school aid budget is set at the $22 billion that it's set at, how is that money then allocated out across school districts? And the current funding formula, which we still have to correct, focuses on the relative wealth of a district, and the lower the wealth of the district, the more state aid that it gets. But the funding formula really emphasizes property values, and
Yes,
as we
right.
know in our rural communities, farmers tend to be land rich and cash poor. So we need to alter that funding formula to be more reflective of the true wealth of a community, their ability to fund their schools, which is a function of income, not property values.
Yes, right.
So
right.
I want to, my goal for the next session is to really focus on getting that formula modified to use a better proxy measurement for the relative wealth or poverty of a district. And something like the number of free and reduced lunch kids that are eligible for free and reduced lunches is I think a better proxy, because it's the same metric that determines their eligibility, whether they live in an urban environment or a rural environment. So we can use it consistently across all those districts to ensure that the money is appropriately allocated, that it's going where it needs to go. Our suburban schools tend to, the funding is more available through property taxes than it is in the high density, low income urban areas and in the rural areas. So I want to try and find a fairer model that ensures that all kids, regardless of their zip code, get an adequate education.
You know, I know you and I agree on this, and I'm sure many of our viewers do too. There probably isn't anything more important than educating our youth. You know, that's the future. You know, the
Absolutely.
better educated they are, the better the opportunity is, the better their self-confidence and esteem. You know, all of the things that a true education provides. Now, Carrie, we obviously live in an area that has a lot of economic growth, has seen a
Yes.
lot of economic
Absolutely.
growth, a lot of economic growth potential.
Yep.
And with that comes all kinds of infrastructure issues. You had mentioned to me once that supplying sufficient power for companies coming into this
Yes.
region is important. Explain a little bit more about that.
So one of the things that I have grown to understand as I've been out in the district talking to businesses is that we have a real power deficit, both electrical power but also natural gas. And that if we want businesses that exist here today to expand, or new advanced manufacturing businesses, the next Global Foundries, or one of the companies that supplies to them or uses what they produce, we need to have an infrastructure that delivers high quality power and sufficient natural gas to fuel those businesses. And we currently operate at a deficit here. So we have to be thinking about this. You know, we want to be in a position that when those businesses are ready to expand, we have the infrastructure here that enables their expansion to happen.
Well, you know what? Immediately that raises some questions. Well, okay, what type of power? Are you talking about fossil fuel power, coal power, whatever, you know, building plants and all these other things? That becomes a very complicated issue. However, we also happen to live in an area where there's an actually rather large natural resource, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what the awareness I want to raise for people is that we need to be looking at alternative energy strategies that take advantage of the natural assets that we already have. And there's two that I think we can draw on as we think through this challenge. One is the farms that we have here, and it's dairy country, and we have a lot of cows, and the cows produce manure, and manure can be converted through anaerobic digesters into power, and that has a lot of benefits in that it also takes methane out of the atmosphere. It takes care of the runoff problem, and it also produces fertilizer and bedding. So it's a pretty interesting technology. Price point's been going down. I've managed through the last budget cycle to expand the alternative energy tax exemption model to include digesters. So counties that want to offer alternative energy property tax exemptions for property owners that do installations on their property digesters are included now.
Got it, okay.
So that's the first step. We're working on trying to bring a pilot project here to this region that will be part of the governor's REV project, which is his energy initiative to try to create microgrids, more local generation. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to bring a pilot project here that will demonstrate the viability of this. Mm-hmm. I think it's got a lot of power. It's got a lot of good things about it.
Yes.
We also have a river. And hydropower is something that used to be a really key source of power for this region. It's fallen off a little bit. We've still got a hydro plant in Stillwater. We have one in Greenwich. We need to, I think, explore expanding those, making hydro another part of this. Now, are those operations going to provide enough power for our industrial uses? Perhaps not. But what they will do is start to draw down or meet the needs of our residential communities so that we can free up capacity that's coming out of other sources to serve our industrial uses. Mm-hmm. So I think we've got to be thinking about this now, because as you said, we want to be ready when those businesses are ready. It takes a long time to get there. We need to be thinking about it now so that we're prepared to capture those jobs when they come available down the road.
Well, you know what that also points out too, is I'm sure you're catching here, is that it's one thing to establish an industrial zone or something like that. It's another thing to be proactive enough so that when these companies are expanding or the companies are considering relocating here, the structures are already in place, not at the expense of the residential consumer, but in place to be able to supply them with their needs, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Sure.
Because just as we've built an education pipeline through our P-Tech programs and our STEM education to be able to prepare young people to take on careers in advanced manufacturing and in high technology, mm-hmm. we need to also deal with the other kinds of things that are attractive to companies to locate here.
That's great. Well, Carrie, thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure.
For coming in. Best of luck. Carrie Woerner, candidate, 113th Assembly District. And I noticed you got a violin there on your lapel there, so you either play the violin or you love the arts.
I love the arts.
You do.
And it's one of the things that I think makes this region so attractive to people is the arts that we have here. I was a board member on Saratoga Arts for a number of years. They're having a big anniversary this year.
That's right.
Of course, SPAC had their big anniversary, and in Washington County we have the Open Studios Tour this summer. We have Salem Artworks out in Salem, the Cambridge Hubbard Hall. There's just an incredible base of artistry here, and I'm here, and I'm pleased to promote it.
Yes, I guess you are. Well, great, Carrie, thanks for taking the time to come in.
Thank you so much, Jesse.
To see this interview again, you can head to our website, looktvonline.com.